Sarah Martinez walked into the crowded coffee shop, her sleeves pushed up to reveal intricate tattoos covering both arms. The morning rush was in full swing, and she could feel the familiar weight of stares following her every movement. A businessman in a pressed suit glanced at her ink-covered skin and quickly looked away, his expression a mixture of disapproval and curiosity. An elderly woman clutched her purse tighter as Sarah passed by her table. This was nothing new. At 28, Sarah had grown accustomed to the assumptions people made about her based on her appearance. The colorful tattoos that decorated her arms told stories most people would never understand. Each design carried meaning that went far beyond what met the eye, but strangers saw only what they wanted to see. She ordered her usual black coffee and found a corner table where she could work on her laptop. The coffee shop was near the university where she was pursuing her master's degree in international relations. Between classes, she often came here to study or catch up on assignments. Today, however, her mind was elsewhere. The job interview was scheduled for 2 o'clock. After completing her military service 6 months ago, Sarah had been searching for the right opportunity to transition into civilian life. The position at Morrison Security Consulting seemed perfect for her background, but she knew the challenge that lay ahead. Every interview felt like a battle against preconceptions. A young mother with 2 small children sat at the table next to hers. The woman kept shooting nervous glances in Sarah's direction, particularly when her toddler wandered close to Sarah's chair. When the little boy dropped his toy car near Sarah's feet, she picked it up and handed it back to him with a gentle smile. "Here you go, buddy," she said softly. The mother quickly scooped up her child and moved to a table across the room. Sarah watched them go, feeling the familiar sting of judgment. She wondered what the woman would think if she knew that those same hands covered in tattoos had once saved the lives of hostages in a compound halfway around the world. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her former teammate, Marcus Rodriguez. "Good luck today, Razor. Show them what elite looks like." Razor. The nickname brought back memories of her 8 years in the Navy, the last 4 as part of an elite SEAL team. Few women had ever made it through the brutal training program, and even fewer had earned the respect she had among her peers. The tattoos that now drew disapproving looks were badges of honor, each one representing a mission, a fallen comrade, or a moment that had shaped her into the warrior she became. The phoenix rising from flames on her right shoulder commemorated her first successful mission as team leader. The compass rose on her left forearm pointed not just to magnetic north, but to the unwavering moral direction that had guided her through the darkest moments of combat. The small anchor behind her ear was for Tommy Chen, a teammate who hadn't made it home from their second deployment. Sarah closed her laptop and gathered her things. She had 2 hours before the interview, enough time to go home and change into her most conservative business suit. She had learned to play the game, to hide the parts of herself that made others uncomfortable. The process always felt like betraying who she truly was, but she understood the reality of the civilian world. Walking to her motorcycle, she noticed a commotion in the parking lot. A man was arguing loudly with a woman next to a broken-down sedan. The situation was escalating quickly, and other people in the area were giving them a wide berth. Sarah's training kicked in automatically, her mind assessing the threat level and potential intervention options. The man grabbed the woman's arm roughly, and Sarah moved without thinking. She approached with the calm confidence that had served her in combat zones around the world. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying a quiet authority. "Is everything okay here?" The man turned toward her, his face red with anger. "Mind your own business, lady. This doesn't concern you." Sarah positioned herself strategically, creating space between the man and woman while maintaining a non-threatening posture. "I'm just making sure everyone's safe. Maybe we can help figure out what's wrong with the car." The woman looked grateful for the intervention, but the man became more aggressive. "What are you, some kind of tough girl? Those tattoos supposed to scare me?" Sarah remained calm, her hands visible and relaxed. She had faced down armed insurgents and hostile forces that would have terrified this man, but she showed no indication of her true capabilities. Instead, she spoke in the same measured tone she might use with a frightened civilian in a war zone. "I'm not trying to scare anyone. I just want to make sure everything's okay. Car trouble can be really frustrating. The man studied her for a moment, clearly trying to decide whether to escalate further. Sarah's calm demeanor and professional bearing seemed to diffuse some of his anger. A security guard from the nearby shopping center had noticed the situation and was walking their way. "Look, the car just overheated," the woman said quickly. "We were just trying to figure out what to do next." Sarah nodded and pulled out her phone. "I know a good towing service that's reasonable. They can probably get you sorted out pretty quickly." The man's aggressive posture began to relax as the immediate tension dissolved. Within minutes, Sarah had coordinated a tow truck and helped push the sedan to a safer location. The couple thanked her before the man walked away, embarrassed by his earlier behavior. As Sarah rode her motorcycle toward home, she reflected on how quickly people's perceptions could change. 5 minutes ago, that man had seen her tattoos and assumed she was looking for trouble. By the end of their interaction, he had shaken her hand and thanked her for her help. Her apartment was a study in contrasts. Military precision was evident in the organized layout and spotless condition, but personal touches revealed the complexity beneath the surface. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes on military history, international relations, and classical literature. Photographs from her deployments sat alongside images of family and friends. One picture showed her SEAL team after a particularly difficult mission in Afghanistan. They were exhausted but victorious, having successfully extracted a kidnapped aid worker from a heavily fortified compound. Sarah studied her younger face in the photo, remembering the weight of responsibility she had carried as team leader. Another image captured a lighter moment during downtime at their base. Marcus was teaching her to play guitar while other teammates relaxed nearby. These were the people who truly knew her, who had seen her at her best and worst. They didn't care about her tattoos or her unconventional appearance. They cared about her character, her skills, and her unwavering commitment to the mission. Sarah changed into her interview outfit, transforming herself into what she hoped would be a more palatable version for civilian employers. The dark business suit covered most of her tattoos, and she wore a high-collared blouse to hide the anchor behind her ear. Professional makeup softened her appearance, and she pulled her dark hair back into a conservative bun. Looking in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. This version felt like a costume, a character she played to navigate a world that wasn't ready for who she really was. But she had learned to adapt, to present different faces for different situations. It was another kind of tactical skill. The drive to Morrison Security Consulting took her through downtown, past the federal building where she had processed her military discharge paperwork. The transition from active duty had been more challenging than any mission she had ever undertaken. In the military, her value was clear and measurable. Her skills were appreciated, her dedication recognized, her leadership respected. In the civilian world, everything was different. Employers seemed nervous about hiring former special operations personnel. Some worried about PTSD or adjustment issues. Others questioned whether military skills were transferable to corporate environments. Many seemed to expect that elite soldiers would be aggressive, inflexible, or difficult to manage. Sarah knew these concerns were largely unfounded. Her military training had taught her discipline, adaptability, and problem-solving skills that exceeded most civilian standards. She had led diverse teams under extreme pressure, managed complex logistics, and made life-or-death decisions with limited information. These experiences had prepared her for almost any challenge the business world could present. But convincing employers of her value remained an uphill battle, made more difficult by her appearance. The tattoos that represented her proudest achievements became obstacles to overcome. The very markers of her elite status in the military community worked against her in job interviews. Morrison Security Consulting was housed in a modern office building downtown. Sarah arrived early and spent a few minutes in her car, reviewing the company information and preparing mentally for the interview. The firm specialized in risk assessment and security consulting for corporate clients, exactly the kind of work where her background should be an asset. The lobby was impressive, with marble floors and contemporary artwork. A receptionist directed her to a conference room on the 15th floor. As she waited, Sarah studied the company's mission statement displayed on the wall. They claimed to value experience, expertise, and innovative thinking. She hoped they meant it. James Morrison entered the room precisely at 2 o'clock. He was a distinguished man in his 50s, wearing an expensive suit and carrying himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to command. Sarah stood and offered a firm handshake, meeting his eyes directly. "Ms. Martinez, thank you for coming in today. Please, have a seat." The interview began conventionally enough. Morrison reviewed her resume, asking standard questions about her education and career goals. Sarah answered professionally, emphasizing her leadership experience and technical skills while downplaying the more dramatic aspects of her military service. "I see you spent 8 years in the Navy," Morrison said, studying her file. "That's quite a commitment. What made you decide to leave?" Sarah had prepared for this question, but it was always difficult to answer honestly without revealing too much. "I felt ready for new challenges. My military experience gave me a strong foundation, and I'm excited to apply those skills in the private sector." Morrison nodded, but she could see questions in his eyes. Her resume was deliberately vague about her specific military role, listing only Naval Special Operations without elaborating on her SEAL team assignment. Most civilian employers had no idea what that really meant, which was often for the best. "Tell me about your leadership experience," Morrison continued. This was safer ground. Sarah described her progression through various military positions, focusing on team management, strategic planning, and operational execution. She spoke about coordinating with international partners, managing diverse personalities, and adapting to rapidly changing situations. Morrison seemed impressed, but Sarah could sense something else in his demeanor. He was studying her carefully, as if trying to reconcile her professional presentation with some preconceived notion. When his gaze lingered on the small portion of tattoo visible at her wrist, she understood. "I have to ask," Morrison said, his tone becoming slightly more informal. "I noticed you have some tattoos. In our business, we work with very conservative corporate clients. Image is important. Would that be a problem?" Sarah had heard this question before, in various forms. She kept her response measured and professional. "I understand the importance of maintaining a professional appearance. I'm comfortable adapting my presentation to meet client expectations." It was a diplomatic answer, but she could see that Morrison wasn't entirely satisfied. There was something about his expression that suggested deeper concerns, assumptions about her character based on her appearance rather than her qualifications. The interview continued for another 30 minutes, covering technical skills, scenario-based questions, and company culture. Sarah answered everything confidently, drawing on her extensive experience without revealing the classified nature of many of her accomplishments. By any objective measure, she was highly qualified for the position. As the meeting concluded, Morrison stood and shook her hand again. "We'll be in touch within the week. Thank you for your time." Sarah left the building knowing she wouldn't get the job. Despite her qualifications, despite her perfect answers, she had seen the doubt in Morrison's eyes. The tattoos had created a narrative in his mind that her professional demeanor couldn't overcome. Walking back to her motorcycle, Sarah felt the familiar frustration that had become part of her civilian life. She was the same person who had earned commendations from admirals, who had been trusted with the most sensitive missions, who had proven herself countless times in situations that would break most people. But none of that seemed to matter when potential employers saw only the ink on her skin. Her phone rang as she was putting on her helmet. Marcus Rodriguez's name appeared on the screen. "How'd it go, Razor?" Sarah sighed, starting her bike. "Same as always. Great interview, wrong assumptions." "Their loss," Marcus said firmly. "You'll find the right fit. Someone's going to be smart enough to see what they're getting." "Maybe. Sometimes I wonder if I should have gotten different tattoos. Or no tattoos at all. Don't even think about it. Those tattoos are part of who you are, part of what you've accomplished. The right employer will understand that." Marcus was right, but it didn't make the process any less frustrating. Sarah rode home through afternoon traffic, her mind racing with thoughts about identity, perception, and the gap between military and civilian cultures. That evening, she sat on her apartment balcony watching the sunset. Tomorrow she would continue her job search, continue the process of translating her military experience into civilian terms, continue fighting against assumptions about her appearance. It was a different kind of mission, but she was determined to succeed. The tattoos on her arms caught the fading light, each design telling a story of courage, sacrifice, and achievement. These weren't random decorations or rebellious statements. They were a visual history of her service, her growth, and her commitment to something greater than herself. Sarah opened her laptop and began researching other potential employers, companies that might be more open-minded about what talent actually looked like. She was an elite warrior, a proven leader, and a dedicated professional. Somewhere out there was an organization smart enough to recognize those qualities beneath the surface assumptions. The next phase of her mission was just beginning. 3 weeks later, Sarah Martinez found herself in an entirely different situation. The rejection from Morrison Security had stung, but it hadn't been unexpected. What surprised her was the phone call that came on a rainy Thursday morning while she was studying for her graduate courses. "Ms. Martinez? This is Detective Lisa Chen with the Metropolitan Police Department. We have an unusual situation, and your name came up as someone who might be able to help us." Sarah set down her coffee, immediately alert. "What kind of situation?" "We have a hostage scenario downtown. The negotiator thinks having someone with your specific background might make a difference. Are you available?" Within 30 minutes, Sarah was riding her motorcycle through city traffic toward the downtown financial district. She had thrown on jeans and a leather jacket over a simple t-shirt, not bothering to cover her tattoos. This wasn't a job interview. This was something she understood completely. The scene was controlled chaos. Police cars lined the street, their red and blue lights painting the gray morning in urgent colors. A SWAT team van sat strategically positioned near the entrance to the First National Bank building. Behind yellow tape, news crews were already setting up their cameras while curious onlookers gathered despite police efforts to maintain distance. Detective Chen met Sarah at the perimeter. She was a compact woman in her early 40s with intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded Sarah of some of her military colleagues. "Thank you for coming so quickly," Chen said, leading Sarah toward the command post. "Here's what we know. 3 armed suspects entered the bank about 2 hours ago during the morning rush. They're holding 12 hostages, including customers and staff." Sarah listened intently as Chen briefed her on the situation. The suspects appeared to be professionals, not desperate amateurs. They had disabled security cameras systematically and positioned themselves strategically throughout the bank. Communication had been limited, and their demands were unclear. "Why did you call me?" Sarah asked. Chen glanced around, then spoke more quietly. The lead negotiator, Captain Rodriguez, served in the Marines. He said he'd heard about a Navy SEAL named Martinez who had experience with exactly this kind of situation overseas. Said if it was the same person, we needed to get you here immediately. Captain Rodriguez. Sarah smiled despite the gravity of the situation. She had worked with Marine Captain Miguel Rodriguez during a joint operation in Syria 3 years ago. He had been impressive then, calm under pressure and skilled at reading people. If he thought she could help, there was probably good reason. The command post was a mobile unit parked across the street from the bank. Inside, multiple screens showed feeds from traffic cameras and drones, while communication equipment crackled with radio traffic. Captain Rodriguez looked up as Sarah entered, his face breaking into a grim smile. "Razor Martinez. I was hoping it was you. Captain Rodriguez. Good to see you again, though I wish it was under better circumstances." Rodriguez quickly brought her up to speed. The suspects had made contact only once, demanding safe passage and a helicopter. They claimed to have explosive devices and warned against any rescue attempts. Standard negotiation tactics weren't working because the suspects seemed to know police procedures. "I think these guys have military training," Rodriguez explained. They're moving like professionals, communicating in code, setting up fields of fire. This isn't some amateur bank robbery. Sarah studied the building layout and tactical assessments on the screens around them. Her mind automatically began processing the information, identifying weaknesses, alternative approaches, potential solutions. It was like riding a bicycle after a long break, the skills came flooding back immediately. "What's the building layout?" she asked. Rodriguez spread architectural plans across the table. "Single story, main entrance here, emergency exit in back. Large open floor for customer service, offices and vault in the rear section. The suspects have positioned themselves to watch all approaches." Sarah traced potential movement patterns with her finger, visualizing the space in 3 dimensions. "Security cameras? Disabled in the first 5 minutes. But we've got external visual through these windows here and here." Rodriguez pointed to the street-facing glass. "Any communication since the initial demands?" "Nothing substantive. They're using burner phones, probably switching frequencies. Classic counter-surveillance behavior." Sarah nodded, her tactical mind fully engaged. This was what she had been trained for, what she excelled at. The familiar rush of mental clarity that came with high-stakes situations washed over her. For the first time in months, she felt completely in her element. "I need to see the scene myself," she said. Rodriguez led her to an observation point in the building across the street. Through high-powered binoculars, Sarah could see into the bank's main floor. The suspects had organized the space efficiently, keeping hostages in clear view while maintaining defensive positions. Their movements were disciplined and coordinated. One detail caught her attention immediately. The lead suspect, a tall man with close-cropped hair, was wearing a particular type of tactical vest that Sarah recognized. It was issued only to certain special operations units. This confirmed Rodriguez's assessment they were dealing with trained professionals. "I know that equipment," she said quietly. "Former military, probably special forces." "Can you tell which branch?" Sarah watched the suspect's movement patterns for several minutes. "The way he's positioned his team, his communication style. I think Army Rangers. Maybe 75th Regiment." This information changed everything. If the suspects were former Rangers, they would know standard police tactics, understand negotiation procedures, and be prepared for most conventional responses. They would also be dangerous in ways that typical criminals weren't. Back at the command post, Sarah shared her assessment with the incident commander, a veteran police captain named Williams. His initial skepticism about involving a civilian consultant quickly evaporated as she demonstrated her understanding of the tactical situation. "So what do you recommend?" Williams asked. Sarah studied the building plans again, considering options that conventional police training might not cover. They're expecting standard procedures, perimeter containment, negotiation, maybe a SWAT breach if talks fail. But their positioning suggests they prepared for those responses. What's the alternative? Unconventional approach. Make them react to something they haven't planned for. Sarah outlined a strategy based on her experience with similar hostage situations in combat zones. Instead of following predictable police protocols, she suggested creating controlled chaos that would disrupt the suspect's tactical advantage while protecting the hostages. The plan was complex and risky, requiring precise timing and coordination between multiple units. Williams listened carefully, asking detailed questions about each phase of the operation. Rodriguez provided additional tactical insights based on his own military experience. "It's unorthodox," Williams finally said. "But conventional approaches aren't working. How confident are you about this?" Sarah met his gaze directly. "I've run similar operations successfully multiple times. But there are always variables. Nothing is guaranteed." Williams made his decision. "Let's do it." The next hour was a carefully orchestrated dance of preparation. Sarah worked with the SWAT team to refine entry procedures, coordinated with Rodriguez on timing for negotiation phases, and briefed patrol units on their specific roles. Despite being technically a civilian consultant, she found herself naturally falling into a leadership role that everyone seemed to accept. As the operation began, Sarah positioned herself at the command post with direct communication to all units. The first phase involved creating a seemingly accidental distraction, a utility truck that accidentally hit a fire hydrant, causing controlled flooding that would draw the suspect's attention to the rear of the building. Phase 1 initiated, came the radio report. Water main breach confirmed. Through the surveillance feeds, Sarah watched the suspects react exactly as predicted. 2 of them moved toward the back of the building to assess this new development, splitting their forces and creating the opening she needed. Phase 2, go, she instructed. A small team of officers approached from an unexpected angle, using the utility distraction as cover. Simultaneously, Rodriguez initiated renewed communication with the suspects, demanding to speak with the hostages to verify their safety. This forced the lead suspect to divide his attention between multiple developing situations. Sarah watched the tactical board as each element moved into position. Her heart rate remained steady, her mind clear and focused. This was what 8 years of elite military training had prepared her for: the ability to see the entire battlefield, anticipate reactions, and coordinate complex operations under extreme pressure. All units, hold position, she said into her headset. Wait for my mark. The critical moment arrived when the lead suspect moved to check on his team members at the rear of the building. For 30 seconds, the main floor would be vulnerable to a coordinated breach from multiple angles. Execute, 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 Sarah commanded. The SWAT team moved with military precision, entering through the front and side entrances simultaneously while other officers secured the rear exit. Flashbang grenades created temporary disorientation while officers quickly identified and protected hostages. Within 90 seconds, all 3 suspects were in custody and all hostages were confirmed safe. No shots had been fired. The operation had been executed flawlessly. As the scene secured, Sarah found herself surrounded by officers offering congratulations and praise. The success of the operation had exceeded everyone's expectations, but, for her, it felt like a return to form. This was who she truly was beneath the civilian facade she had been wearing for months. Detective Chen approached with a wide smile. That was incredible. How did you know they would react that way? Experience, Sarah said simply. Similar situations, different locations. Captain Williams joined the group, clearly impressed. Ms. Martinez, I don't know what your current employment situation is, but I think we need to talk. Over the next several hours, Sarah found herself in more meetings than she had attended in months. Word of the successful hostage rescue spread quickly through law enforcement channels, and her role in planning the operation generated significant interest from various agencies. The FBI field office wanted to discuss consulting opportunities for complex tactical situations. The State Department mentioned potential security contracting work. Even the mayor's office called to express gratitude and inquire about her availability for future emergencies. But the most unexpected conversation came from James Morrison, the security consultant who had interviewed her weeks earlier. He called her cell phone personally, his tone entirely different from their previous interaction. Ms. Martinez, I saw the news coverage of today's incident. I understand you played a key role in the successful resolution. Sarah was tired but professional. I was glad to help. I think we made a mistake when we met. I'd like to invite you back to discuss the position again if you're interested. The irony wasn't lost on her. 24 hours ago, Morrison had been concerned about her tattoos affecting his company's professional image. Now that her expertise had been demonstrated publicly, those same concerns seemed to have evaporated. Mr. Morrison, I appreciate the call, but my situation has changed. That was an understatement. By evening, Sarah had received 4 serious job offers, 3 consulting proposals, and 2 requests for media interviews. The same skills that had made her invaluable in the military were suddenly in high demand in the civilian world. As she rode her motorcycle home that night, Sarah reflected on the dramatic change in her circumstances. The hostage situation had been resolved successfully, innocent people were safe, and her career prospects had transformed completely. But the most important realization was simpler than any of that. She had remembered who she really was. The months of job interviews, of covering her tattoos and downplaying her military experience, of trying to fit into spaces that didn't understand her value, all of that had been preparation for this moment. She didn't need to hide her capabilities or apologize for her appearance. She needed to find situations where her unique combination of skills and experience could make a real difference. At home, Sarah opened her laptop and began researching organizations that specialized in high-risk security consulting, crisis management, and tactical operations. She was done trying to squeeze herself into conventional corporate molds. It was time to pursue opportunities that valued substance over surface appearance. Her phone buzzed with another text from Marcus Rodriguez. Saw the news. Knew you'd find your place eventually. Proud of you, Razor. Looking at her reflection in the dark window, Sarah saw someone she barely recognized from the conservative business suits and hidden tattoos of recent months. This was the real version, confident, capable, and completely comfortable with who she had become through years of challenging service. The tattoos on her arms weren't obstacles to overcome. They were proof of a warrior's journey, visible reminders of capabilities most people couldn't imagine. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities with organizations smart enough to value that combination. For the first time since leaving the military, Sarah felt optimistic about her civilian future. The right path had been there all along. She just needed to stop apologizing for being exactly who she was meant to be. 6 months after the bank hostage incident, Sarah Martinez stood before a classroom of federal agents at the FBI Training Academy in Quantico, Virginia. Her sleeves were rolled up, tattoos fully visible, as she clicked through slides showing tactical scenarios from around the world. The audience of experienced law enforcement professionals hung on every word. Traditional negotiation assumes rational actors, Sarah explained, gesturing toward a diagram on the screen. But, when you're dealing with trained military personnel who've gone rogue, conventional wisdom becomes a liability. A hand shot up from the middle of the classroom. Agent Parker, ma'am. You mentioned counter-surveillance techniques. How do we identify former special operations suspects before the situation escalates? Sarah smiled. Agent Parker was young, probably fresh out of the academy, but asking smart questions. Excellent question. Watch for these indicators. She had found her calling in the most unexpected way. After the bank incident, Sarah had initially planned to accept one of the high-paying consulting positions that came flooding in. Instead, a conversation with Detective Chen had led her towards something more meaningful, to training law enforcement to handle the increasingly complex threats they faced in modern policing. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit had reached out first, interested in her insights about military-trained criminals. Then came the State Department, looking for expertise on international security threats. Before long, Sarah found herself designing curricula for multiple agencies, sharing knowledge that could save lives in the field. What surprised her most was how naturally teaching came to her. Leading SEAL teams had required constant training and mentorship of junior operators. Translating that experience to civilian law enforcement felt like a logical extension of her military service. Ms. Martinez, another agent called out, "Can you walk us through the decision-making process during a fluid tactical situation?" Sarah pulled up a video feed from a training exercise. Absolutely. Notice how the team leader's position changes every 30 seconds. She's constantly reassessing, adapting to new information. This is what we call dynamic leadership. The footage showed a simulated hostage rescue, with Sarah herself leading a mixed team of FBI agents and local SWAT officers during a joint training exercise the previous month. Her voice could be heard clearly on the audio, calmly directing units while processing multiple streams of information. In the video, her tattoos were clearly visible, but none of the agents in the exercise seemed to notice or care. They were focused entirely on her expertise, her calm under pressure, her ability to see solutions that others missed. It was a stark contrast to those first civilian job interviews where her appearance had overshadowed her qualifications. After the class ended, Sarah packed up her materials while several agents approached with follow-up questions. These conversations had become one of her favorite parts of the job, the opportunity to mentor the next generation of professionals who would face increasingly complex threats. Agent Parker lingered after the others had left. "Ma'am, can I ask you something personal?" "Sure. I've been reading about your military background. Navy SEALs are legendary, and what you accomplished as a woman in that field is incredible. But some of my classmates were wondering about your tattoos. Do they represent specific missions or achievements?" Sarah had learned to navigate this question carefully. Many of her military accomplishments remained classified, but she could share the broader significance without compromising operational security. "Each tattoo tells a story," she said, rolling up her sleeve to reveal the phoenix on her shoulder. "This one represents transformation, the person I became through military service. It's about rising from challenges stronger than before." She showed him the compass rose on her forearm. "This reminds me that leadership means providing direction when others are lost. In combat, in law enforcement, in any high-pressure situation, people look to their leaders for guidance." Agent Parker studied the detailed artwork with new appreciation. "I never thought about tattoos that way. I guess I assumed they were just decorative. Most people do. That's part of why I ended up in this teaching role instead of traditional consulting. I realized that changing perceptions was as important as sharing tactical knowledge." This had become an unexpected but crucial part of Sarah's work. Beyond the technical training, she found herself serving as a bridge between different worlds, military and civilian, traditional and unconventional, appearance and substance. Her visible tattoos had become teaching tools, conversation starters about the danger of assumptions. After the academy, Sarah drove to Washington for a meeting with Director Patricia Hayes at the Department of Homeland Security. The DHS had been tracking an increase in domestic terrorism incidents involving suspects with military training, and they wanted Sarah's input on developing new response protocols. Director Hayes was a formidable woman in her 50s who had built her reputation on data-driven decision-making and innovative approaches to complex problems. Her office reflected this philosophy, walls lined with charts, maps, and analysis reports rather than traditional political photographs. "Ms. Martinez, thank you for coming. I've been reviewing your recommendations from the Joint Task Force report. Your insights about radicalization patterns among former Special Operations personnel are particularly valuable." Sarah had spent the previous 3 months working with a multi-agency task force studying domestic terrorism trends. The classified report she had co-authored identified several concerning patterns and proposed new approaches for early intervention and response. "The key finding is that traditional profiling doesn't work with military-trained suspects," Sarah explained. "Their operational security, tactical knowledge, and understanding of law enforcement procedures make them far more dangerous than conventional criminals. Your recommendations for specialized response teams are being seriously considered at the highest levels. But implementation will require significant training and resource allocation." This was the kind of work Sarah had never imagined during her military service. She was essentially helping to redesign how America's law enforcement and security agencies approached their most challenging threats. The responsibility was enormous, but so was the potential impact. Director Hayes pulled up a secure presentation on her computer screen. "I want to show you something that just came across our intelligence channels." The briefing detailed a foiled terrorist plot in California involving 3 former military personnel who had been planning attacks on federal facilities. The investigation had uncovered detailed tactical plans, weapons caches, and surveillance operations that demonstrated sophisticated operational planning. "This is exactly what we've been warning about," Sarah said, studying the intelligence reports. "These suspects were using advanced tradecraft, counter-surveillance techniques, and tactical knowledge that most law enforcement agencies aren't prepared to handle." The California incident was resolved successfully because the local FBI field office had been through your training program. They recognized the indicators early and adapted their approach accordingly. Sarah felt a surge of professional satisfaction. This was why she had chosen teaching and consulting over more lucrative private sector opportunities. Her work was making a measurable difference in protecting innocent people from increasingly sophisticated threats. Director Hayes, I'd like to propose expanding the training program. We should be reaching local police departments, not just federal agencies. Most of these incidents start at the local level. I was hoping you'd say that. The budget allocation for next fiscal year includes funding for a national training initiative. We want you to lead it. The meeting concluded with Sarah accepting a formal position as Senior Tactical Consultant for Domestic Security Operations. It was a role that had been created specifically for her unique background and expertise. More importantly, it was work that felt like a natural extension of her military service, protecting people from threats they couldn't see coming. Driving back to her apartment that evening, Sarah's phone rang with a call from Marcus Rodriguez. "Razor, I heard through the grapevine about your new DHS position. Congratulations." "Thanks, Marcus. It feels good to be doing meaningful work again. I've got some news too. Remember that private military company I was considering? I decided to pass. Instead, I'm taking a position with the State Department's Diplomatic Security Service." Sarah smiled. Marcus had been struggling with his own civilian transition, caught between lucrative private contracts and his desire to continue serving a larger purpose. The State Department position would allow him to use his skills while protecting American diplomats around the world. That's perfect for you. You always were the best at close protection work. The funny thing is, they specifically mentioned your recommendation letter. Apparently, your reputation is opening doors for all of us former operators. This was another unexpected benefit of Sarah's public profile since the bank incident. As one of the few female Navy SEALs willing to speak publicly about her experiences, she had become a valuable advocate for other veterans transitioning to civilian careers. Her apartment had evolved significantly over the past year. The military precision remained, but personal touches reflected her new civilian life. Framed certificates from training academies hung alongside her military commendations. Photographs from recent teaching assignments sat next to images from her deployment days. One new addition was a letter from Agent Parker's training class. The entire group had written to thank her for the tactical survival course that had prepared them for their first field assignments. Several mentioned how her approach to leadership under pressure had already proven valuable in real situations. Sarah opened her laptop and began working on curriculum for the new national training program. The scope was ambitious, developing standardized protocols for identifying and responding to military-trained domestic threats while training thousands of local law enforcement officers across the country. The program would require careful balance between operational security and practical application. She couldn't reveal classified tactical methods, but she could teach general principles that would help officers recognize and adapt to unconventional threats. It was exactly the kind of complex challenge she thrived on. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Detective Chen, who had become both a professional colleague and personal friend over the past months. "Saw the news about your DHS appointment. Well deserved. Coffee tomorrow to celebrate?" Sarah smiled, typing back her acceptance. Chen represented something important in her civilian life, a relationship built on mutual respect and shared professional values rather than military history. These new connections were helping her build an identity that honored her past while embracing her future. Later that evening, Sarah stood on her balcony watching the city lights. The view reminded her of nights on base overseas, but the context was entirely different. Instead of planning military operations, she was designing programs to protect American communities. Instead of leading armed missions, she was teaching others to think strategically about complex threats. The tattoos on her arms caught the ambient light from the street below. Each design still carried the same meaning, the same memories of service and sacrifice. But their significance had evolved. They were no longer barriers to overcome in job interviews or symbols that required explanation. They had become conversation starters, teaching tools, visible reminders that expertise comes in unexpected packages. A year ago, Sarah had been struggling to find her place in a civilian world that didn't understand her value. She had been covering her tattoos, downplaying her military experience, and trying to fit into conventional expectations about what professional success looked like. now she understood that the problem hadn't been her appearance or her background. The problem had been looking for acceptance in places that weren't ready for what she represented. Once she stopped apologizing for who she was and started looking for opportunities that valued her unique capabilities, everything changed. The national training program would be her biggest challenge yet, requiring her to coordinate with dozens of agencies, train thousands of officers, and develop protocols that could adapt to rapidly evolving threats. It was the kind of mission that would have tested her abilities even during her military service. But Sarah felt ready for the challenge. She had found her place in the civilian world not by hiding who she was, but by being authentically herself in contexts where that authenticity was valued. Her tattoos weren't obstacles, they were proof of a journey that had prepared her for exactly this kind of responsibility. Tomorrow she would begin building the team for the national program, recruiting experts from military, law enforcement, and academic backgrounds. She would design training that could save lives while changing perceptions about what expertise looked like. She would continue the mission in a different uniform, serving the same values that had guided her throughout her military career. As Sarah headed inside to continue her planning, she felt the deep satisfaction that came from meaningful work. This was what she had been meant to do all along. The path had been unconventional, marked by setbacks and misconceptions, but it had led her exactly where she belonged. The elite warrior had found her place in the civilian world, not by changing who she was, but by finding people smart enough to recognize what elite really meant.